Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of 2025, where we're going to be talking all things artificial intelligence. So looking about AI in non-for-profits, bringing it all to life, tools, partners, and best practice. Thanks, Alan. We can move on. So just some housekeeping rules really to say the session is being recorded and it will be available on demand afterwards, so you can watch it at your leisure afterwards. There's a Q&A box that you will see, and that's really for any questions that you have. We really want this to be as interactive as possible, so put your questions in throughout the session at any time, and we will cover off as many of them as possible. And you'll see there's also a chat box that's really just for any more technical questions, and my lovely colleagues in the background will be keeping an eye on those. Thanks. So I'm Joyce Harmon, I'm Head of Client Services at Hart, and I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic gentlemen this morning. Firstly, Alex, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Alex Skinner. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Pixelate Group. We've been working in the sector since around 2002, so a fair while. And yeah, we produce membership association platforms like Ready Membership, and more recently AI targeted tools as well.
Perfect, thank you. And Alan.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Alan Perestrello, Managing Director of Hart Square.
Perfect, thank you. So just for those of you not aware of Hart Square, just to say we are a consultancy practice working in the non-for-profit sector, and really our focus is all about enabling digital change within that sector. So some stats, I'm not going to go through all of those now. So this is the third in our AI series that we've been running for the last while. And you will see first where we were talking about the strategy side of things, then we covered ethical considerations and governance. Those recordings are available, you can find them on the Hart Square website. And now we're talking today about the tools and best practice. And I say the recording will be available later on today. So now I'm going to hand over to Alan.
Thanks, Joyce. So good morning, everyone. This is the third in our series on AI. When we envisaged this, we probably thought we would do three as the topic continues to grow and expand. And this is certainly a very interesting topic. I think this is probably so far our most popular webinar to date. And so it's quite likely we might actually end up running some future sessions on AI, I'm sure of it. So I really thought it would be useful just to start off with kind of answering the question, what is artificial intelligence? So the official kind of definition, it's the simulation of human intelligence by machines, particularly computer systems, to perform tasks that typically require human cognition. And so that could be things like looking at data, it could be predictive analytics, it could be looking at things like propensity to give from a fundraising perspective, or likeliness to renew from a membership perspective. It looks at patterns and it can make decisions, and you can automate lots of things. Chatbots fall into this kind of AI category, thinking about sort of fraud detection, things that are happening quite on the background. That's kind of the typical use case that AI has been around. And AI has actually been around for quite a while. It's just that actually with the launch of generative AI over the past 2 or 3 years, that the real interest has kind of spiked, and we're starting to see some great things coming out of it. So what is generative AI? It's a subset of artificial intelligence, and generative AI focuses on creating new original content such as text, images, music, or code that mimics human creativity and thinking. So I thought this was quite useful or quite nice actually, to add in a quote here from Stephen Hawking, the theoretical physicist, cosmologist, and author. And everything that civilization has to offer is a product of human intelligence. That's a given. And we cannot predict what we might achieve when this intelligence is magnified by the tools that AI might provide. And I think that's where we really see ourselves now. And one of the reasons why we're seeing such an uptick in interest in the topic of AI, and why it's so important for us to be talking about it at the moment, because the opportunities are tremendous. There are risks, there are issues, and we've spoken about those in the previous sessions, and I'm sure that we will speak about them again. But the opportunities are there, and now is the time to start thinking about how to leverage those opportunities. I thought this was also a good time to start talking about putting in place some AI use cases that might be useful for people to start thinking about, and kind of one of the sort of topic focuses for the session today. So this is not an exhaustive list. I think that we would find more, and I think in the Q&A sessions as we go through things today, we will find more opportunity to find new ones as well. So one that I think gets often forgotten is kind of strategic direction, and that is senior leadership teams. I can see some people on the call today fit that criteria, is looking at how can you use AI to help you with strategic direction. And that's about using data analytics and insights in the data you already have. It might be market analysis, to assess and understand whether there are new services or programs that you can develop. You could be looking at your existing data and looking at how you can use AI to identify gaps and take opportunities. I was talking to a very well-known animal-focused membership body, and they were looking at how could they possibly expand their offering. They brought in some data scientists who used AI to trawl through their data. And actually, part of the response was, you pretty much have reached everybody in your captive market. There are no new people in the UK you could reach. So actually, your opportunity to grow and expand your organization is through product development and service offering, not through reaching new people. I think that's a great example of ensuring that you can use data and AI to identify opportunities rather than going down a painful and expensive process of finding that out yourselves. So that's a great example, I think, of where strategic direction will come in. Operational efficiency is probably the area that we see the most active use currently in terms of deployment of AI. And this is typically around helping people at an individual productivity level with things like automation. We're talking about things like scheduling apps, meeting recordings. I think we're starting to see those popping up in quite a lot of sessions that we join these days. And that's a great use of AI. Doing things like taking notes, which is typically, a task that someone needs to do. We can free someone up on those meetings to participate rather than just being the note taker. Regulatory functions, compliance monitoring for those of you in regulatory capacities, or as charities who may have compliance concerns, you can use AI to look at your data and identify gaps. You can look at it to automate a lot of your processes to ensure that compliance is placed. Great example of that is probably things like fraud detection. That's a great use case at the moment for AI across multiple industries. But I think for those organizations that are concerned about regulatory compliance and fraud specifically, AI is a great execution. I also think legal research in terms of membership organizations that are providing legal advisory services to your members, you can certainly achieve a lot by using AI to take a lot of the load off your internal teams on that side. Engagement enhancement. This is also another area that's quite popular. I think we've seen quite a growth in sort of chatbots and virtual assistants, which can be used really effectively in the membership space. And I think Alex has got some great examples about how that can be used for answering questions. Answering questions that maybe humans have traditionally always had to be there to answer. AI can certainly tackle a lot of those questions. So, logging in to quick, virtual assistant, what are my outstanding dues? Do I have any, events that I should be attending? AI can answer those questions for you and take a load off your internal support teams. Also looking at things like personalizing communication is a great use case. Marketing, we are seeing quite a lot of uptake in terms of general content and image generation. We will see a new term being used around the word slop, which is going to enter the Oxford Dictionary, I'm sure, in 2025. And it will generally refer to the downsides to using AI from marketing generation. That is, poorly executed images that don't make sense and have just been thrown up because it's quick and easy. So there are downsides to it. But I think if we recognize the opportunities, we are cognizant of the downsides, we can still utilize these tools for effective gain. And campaign automation is certainly an area that we see a great opportunity for marketing teams to not be burdened with setting up, large complex campaigns can be automated through AI.
Sorry, Alan, I'm going to just jump in quickly. Your mic is just going slightly quiet, so could you maybe just turn up the volume a little bit? You're kind of jumping in and out. Sorry to interrupt.
I think no problems. Thank you for that, Joyce. Apologies to everyone. Do let me know if this fixes it. So looking at segmentation optimization, there's a lot of data available to organizations and using predictive analytics and sentiment prediction are great things. We've already spoken about things like propensity to give. These are all things that AI can be used. And then kind of finally looking at this stakeholder management, things like case management, especially for those of you in regulatory or service offering sort of environments, case management, AI can certainly automate a lot of those things in terms of surfacing information. What are the next steps to take on this case, etc. There's some great opportunities there. Volunteer engagement in terms of scheduling, reaching out to people, doing all those kind of reach out campaigns to volunteers. AI can certainly help you with a lot of this. I thought it was a good opportunity to pass over to Alex and to see if he had any other sort of use cases that maybe I hadn't identified or brought to the fore.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of points here. Obviously, most of these I think run in isolation. So case management I think is a really obvious one where you have the ability to train or take context from how previous cases have been handled by manual caseworkers. So early stage triage is a definitely an obvious one, as is the ability to actually play back trail of thought to the person that's actually submitting a case to say, we don't believe that this should go through to a human, or written much better than that, on the basis of this trail of thought and on the basis of understanding what you've submitted and so on and so forth. The other one which is really kind of hot off the press and saw a use case last week is really around networking. So this was actually an AI agent that people could interview. So this was you would have a phone call with the AI that essentially would then transcribe and record the interview, and then on the basis of it asking you a whole series of questions around your interests and goals, was then effectively suggesting people that you might want to connect with. So it was essentially interviewing a body of a community in order to sort of make connections in a slightly more interesting way than simply asking people what are your interests or tell me about yourself in a bio. And I think if we say that a lot of people are perfectly happy talking versus writing is always difficult in terms of writing about yourself, then I thought that was a pretty interesting use case. But I think actually joining the dots as well, so actually using context from the knowledge libraries, for example, to actually inform case management answers, and obviously relies on the connectivity of different systems. But yeah, absolutely, there's some really exciting examples here.
Well, thanks, Alex. So I'm sure that if we start asking our audience here to think about specific challenges they might be facing, I'm sure that we could identify more. And so it's a good opportunity for you to remind everyone today. Please do post any questions. We try and make our sessions as conversational as possible. So if you do have any questions for Alex or myself, or any challenges that you've got going, please put them into the Q&A box, and we will certainly do our best to answer them. As I say, we want to make these as conversational as possible. We do have a Q&A section at the end, but we do also have a discussion topic in the middle of the webinar. So I thought this was a good opportunity to pass it back to Joyce to run our first poll for today.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, so let me just launch this. So what we're looking at here is, how would you describe your organization's current level of AI readiness? So I'm going to let that just run for a couple of seconds to see. Interestingly, so far, everybody 100% is saying we're just exploring AI and its potential. I don't think that's possibly any surprises there. And being followed up then next by, we are working towards implementing AI. So I'm just going to let that run just for another second or two, and then, okay, so I'm going to end the poll and let me share the results. So interestingly, probably to no surprise, the main 72% is people are exploring the potential of AI, with some people thinking about implementing it, and then some 8%, we have some tools and systems in place. Alex, just quickly, any thoughts or surprises there on those results?
Not really. I mean, I think that there isn't a question that sort of says, metaphorically, I'm all in. Here's all our chips. So I think the exploration side of things. What I would say is that with the dominance of things like generative AI and some of the use cases that people might be exposed to, where people have no intentions of implementing it, I wonder whether that is kind of directly related to kind of understanding the art of the possible, and actually, when we see lots of these examples around content generation and writing and hallucination and things like that, it makes us feel that it couldn't possibly, do sort of very rules orientated tasks. So I wonder whether there's a degree of relationship with that, or actually whether it's risk orientated at the moment in terms of being petrified about what might happen to our data.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely, completely agree. Alan, any thoughts from you? And then also I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, I think that the results are pretty much, I think, what we would see, what we would expect to see, and what we have seen on previous webinars where we've asked similar sorts of questions around this. I do think that it's important to understand what the reasons behind kind of, where people are. I think, it's great to see that we have people on the call today who have some tools and systems in place. And it would be great to hear from them in the Q&A session about any sort of issues. It doesn't have to be a question. If people on the call today have got some points they want to make, by all means, throw them into the Q&A box, and we can certainly discuss those when we get to that part of the session. But it's consistent with what I would expect to see. Hopefully through this session today and through other initiatives that we're running, people do start to look at those reasons why they might be cautious, why they might be justifiably risk adverse, and do something about it. Risk is there, but you can mitigate risk if you have the right governance frameworks and you have the right partners in place to support you.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to stop sharing. And actually, just to point, Alan, on that before I hand back to you around, is it risk? Is it understanding, as you say, Alex, the art of the possible? We are running a survey around AI, and it would be really useful if people could feed into that, because it helps build this knowledge of kind of what the challenges are. We will have a slide on that later. So back to you, Alan.
Thanks, Joyce. So I thought it was useful to actually look at some statistics to help flesh out kind of where people are. And this will probably correlate with a lot of the results we've seen. So people on the call will probably feel comfort from some of this. But what is actually interesting in and of itself is that when you actually go look into, where is AI being used, practical, bringing it to life, a lot of the research statistics are coming out are predominantly US based. And I think that, to a degree, tells a story about where the US is in terms of its adoption of tech and its use of tech. And so I think some of these are quite interesting. So common applications of AI in nonprofit organizations. This is actually from the Center for Effective Philanthropy in the US. And I thought it was interesting to see that 35% of their respondents are already using AI in some way, shape, or form for that classic use case now of internal productivity. Not too far behind, but as expected, kind of marketing communications, because those are kind of easy, relatively low-hanging fruit. There are risks, but I think it's easy to identify those risks and mitigate them. What I found interesting in this report was that actually they are seeing 24% of respondents saying that they're actually starting to use AI to assist them in development and fundraising initiatives, which I thought was a great example of the fact that it's there. I was also pleased to see that the number isn't actually as far off the first two use cases as I was probably expecting. So I think that's an interesting indicator and something that people can take comfort from in terms of starting to get into AI as a topic and an execution area. However, I did want to point out that in the same report, they did note that 90% of the people who participated in the survey said they had no policies in place for AI use. Now, obviously, I think that's an area of kind of concern for some people, but it's something that I do think is a starting place and something where people can start to start them. If you've looked at the policies, you will start to take the first steps. So that would probably be one of my first sort of guiding points that we'll get to later about how to start taking furtive steps in implementation of AI. I did want to sort of point to some great, stats kind of used here from the Twilio report, which is, Twilio is an automation and AI enablement tool. And so they've run some surveys over the past 3-4 years, and the stats kind of do increase on this. But 90% of the nonprofits they surveyed said that they were looking to leverage or were currently using AI in some way, shape, or form in their digital communications. And that's an obviously sort of understandable one. And then 92% of nonprofits believe that AI will enhance their engagement with their end users and stakeholders in some way, shape, or form over the years. So looking at a couple of other data points here, 75% of nonprofits said that generative AI had the potential to transform their marketing efforts. And that is from a Google report, but then consistent with the report, it's also saying that 2/3 of those people responded said they had lack of familiarity with AI, and that was probably their single biggest barrier to adoption. So I think the lesson here is that if you do start with small use cases, prototypes, etc., you can start to take the first steps. So getting those first steps are probably going to happen after you gain some familiarity. And it's just identifying those easy use cases to do that. Looking at a UK report, this is the charity Digital Skills Report, and asking the question, are you or your organization taking any of the following steps to engage further with AI? Not too surprising to see that just over 1/3 of respondents said no, they are not doing anything with AI. But an equal number, and I assume these are the same people, saying that they're starting to attend events like you are today on this call, possibly experimenting, which I think is a natural and an encouraged thing to do, provided you know where your sort of policies are and what your governance structure is in place to do that. But we are starting to see people starting to take steps around ideation and starting to discuss use cases with their colleagues, and starting to develop those policies. So we are seeing some furtive grassroots here in terms of how AI is going to start. But I did think the interesting thing here was that even on the survey, they did not ask the question, are you live yet? So I think that that was part of probably assuming that people aren't yet live. I would hope to see that when they run this report later this year again, that we do see people taking furtive steps to mitigate the issue. When we look at kind of adoption issues, this is from a report by BDO looking at their nonprofit 2024 benchmarking report. What are the obstacles to your AI adoption? And I think these are kind of now digging into sort of a detail level, which is quite useful to see. 53% of the respondents said they felt that the lack of clean data or data cleanliness, and I assume this is broadly data related topics, were reasons why they were not taking steps to go forward in AI adoption. Close behind that, lack of skills, which is kind of understandable. I think that's a common theme for lots of people. Making the time and the investments to grow those skills is a challenge. And then the cost of AI. There is concern about how much cost these tools will increase. I think if anyone's kind of an early adopter on any sort of technology, the cost curve tends to be at its highest. And then as the adoption builds, you will start to see the competitive landscape that people start to bring those costs down. So I think the cost of AI will start to decrease as it becomes ubiquitous across a number of platforms. And we're already starting to see that with the large technology platforms. And it would be good to get Alex's take on this as well. Employee resistance is an interesting one. Obviously, there are concerns amongst employees that is AI going to replace their roles? So I think this is a key point to address. I don't think that AI in itself will start to replace roles. I think it's first and foremost going to augment roles. I think if people were thinking about using AI to replace humans, I would probably suggest that those roles were at risk anyway. And I do believe that that employee engagement will be the best way to address this. So 34% or 33% said that ethics and safety concerns were concerns for them. And then unsure of the potential return that AI might generate is a justified one linked to the cost of AI, I assume. And then really interesting, but kind of not too surprising, is the fact that 20% of people said they just do not have the time to even sort of take those first steps and start looking at things. So interesting, but I think what's interesting about that for me is that it's the last one on the list. Typically with the nonprofit area, there are time and resources always kind of going to be there, but it's the lowest one on the list. So I think if we start to address the others, that will start to balance itself out. So Alex, any thoughts from you on that?
I think from a perspective of data access, I mean, data access, and I mean, and I'll cover this in a minute, but I mean, most of the solutions that we're seeing rely on us at least having to have some foresight as to what data I need to make available to the AI to therefore get the answers that I'm interested in. So I think that I agree. I think the lack of data cleanliness, I'm not utterly convinced that's just data cleanliness. I think data access, data integration is, as you say, is all probably part of that data question. We're seeing, that actually AI is pretty good at putting up with or making good choices as it relates to gaps in data or format changes and things like that. So I think that data point is definitely there.
Yeah, and I think it's good to see that people are aware of the fact that good AI does depend on good data, And so it's kind of a foundational thing that people are starting to come to terms with in terms of if you're going to take any direction or initiatives in AI, you do have to have an understanding of your data and you have to have ability to cleanse it. I will say that I think there are some great tools out there in the AI space for actually helping you do that with in terms of the data cleanliness. And like anything, taking the first step is kind of the first thing. So, sorry, Alex, you were going to say?
So what I would say is that good data doesn't necessarily mean digitized, and it doesn't necessarily mean data manipulated into kind of source formats. If we take, for example, some specific examples around plain English text where we've got reports or we've got resources that are in PDFs or in Word documents. Obviously, we know that the language capabilities in the LLMs are strong. Tables of data have historically been problematic because the meaning of tabular data, whether it's represented in columns or whether it's represented in rows, has been problematic. But what we're seeing a lot more of is what you would describe as sort of multimodal models, where you're seeing combinations of things like computer vision, OCR, for example, the ability to take an invoice, for example, that is actually a pretty complex document, and actually turn it into a format that's understandable. So I would say data access is a bigger problem. And PII in terms of personal data and that being littered throughout and identifying that to make sure it's stripped out is probably a bigger problem than necessarily now the formats, because actually we're seeing some really positive trends in terms of its understanding of even complex things like charts and that kind of data.
Yeah, agreed. So I thought actually this was a good opportunity to bring you into a deeper conversation around it, and hand over to Joyce to sort of, discuss a few of the detailed points.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had some great questions come in already. So please, thanks for those, and please bring some more in. So I suppose, first of all, Alex, you've kind of alluded to this already, but tell us a little bit more about yourself, the short summary, and kind of your thinking on AI.
Yeah, so a lot of my thinking on AI has come out of the work that we've been doing as a business in terms of systems development. So one of the things that we've constantly seen is that data living in lots of different systems make sort of unified decision making tricky. So you can look at some of the reports that come out that consistently talk about the fact that integration of data and getting our website talking to our CRM and all of our different areas has always been, going back to the mists of time, it's always been a problem that people have been talking about. So we've been building platforms where we're kind of unifying data into a single platform. The idea being that if all the data's there, then we can make smart rules, we can make smart decisions, we can use that data. And obviously simple examples of that would be using engagement data to try and help drive retention or those kinds of things. So if we tackle things first and foremost as a data problem or a knowledge problem, having the data all in one place is a really great starting position, because it means that we don't necessarily need to presuppose what data we're interested in, because we know it's all in the same metaphorical bucket. The question from Caroline Baldwin actually that says, as an association, we have a body of resources that we want our members to be able to access in a more user-friendly way. Semantic search, summary generation is key to that. Any thoughts? That for me is the biggest thing that we're seeing at the moment. So one of our clients is actually building a bot that replaces the kind of activity that the president would previously be doing, where dealing with member queries, tackling one of the other questions around what's a good starting point. A good starting point is taking a knowledge base, and a knowledge base doesn't necessarily need to be PDFs or traditional documents. It can even be things like recorded webinars with transcribing videos in order to take knowledge from quite raw formats, because obviously writing reports is expensive. And obviously semantic search in terms of its understanding of knowledge, knowing that multilingual and multi-language are related, or translation and interpreting are all kind of part and parcel of the same sort of language question. So we're building systems at the moment. We've been doing this on a custom basis, but we're productizing it, as you would expect, specifically around the idea of local knowledge sources that can be either documents, slides, diagrams, video recordings, allowing either our staff, and that might be a good starting position that's quite low risk, make the tool available to staff first to help answer member questions before, as we gain confidence, sort of rolling that out to our end users. But the experience ultimately is, I ask a question, I get an answer, I then get citations or relevance to say, check page 12 of this document, look at 19 minutes to 22 minutes on this particular video, which then adds, you know, comfort to the fact that it's not hallucinating or being creative, depending on your perspective. And the other use case that we're seeing a lot is based on taking statistical data, making it available and asking it for insights. But we've taken the view of running our own multimodal models hosted by us, that then kind of de-risks some of the elements around my data's just going off, you know, and I have no idea whether it's being used to train or what's really happening to it. So yeah, that's a 30,000-foot overview, I guess.
Perfect. That's kind of an overview and answered quite a lot of the questions already, which is great. We're going to come on to a demonstration in a minute, but actually there's lots of different questions coming in. A really great one, but I'm going to leave that to the discussion point. But an interesting one's just coming kind of in relation to what you're saying, Alex. Saying, will AI be offered as a standard offering within a system or as a cost as a plugin? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest drivers of that is the associated costs of running the compute. It's you know, in our case, we actually needed to renegotiate some of our contracts pretty heavily due to some of the costs associated with it. I think there's definitely a baseline that you know, personally, we will have a baseline in our product offering. There's no doubt about that. It's really when you start looking at the some of the sort of more complicated or complex areas, specifically around things like video transcription, you know, you may see some kind of metering model. I mean, I personally am not a big fan of the per seat model as it relates to users, because actually it doesn't much matter to me whether I have 50 users or 100 users. What matters to me is their activity and how much compute power they're burning. So yeah, that's my view anyway.
Perfect. So I think really, because there's lots of other questions I want to cover, but I think let's actually see a live demonstration of some AI. So I think, Alan, if you can just move on to the next slide, we're just going to look at some example prompts. So I'm not even going to try and pretend and explain this. So Alex, please explain the prompt and then what we're going to see in the short demo.
Yeah, okay. So essentially what I was going to show here is just a really basic example. It's a live recorded video, so it's kind of live. But essentially most of what we see in tooling, regardless of vendor, relies on a technology called RAG, which is this whole idea of bringing together a context for the question that I'm asking. Now, obviously, when I ask a question, that's part of the question, but actually the knowledge or statistics or data that I'm asking the question about forms part of the question that we see. So in the example that I'm showing here, it's simply using ChatGPT. There's nothing particularly impressive about it, but what it's doing is it's taking some standard membership KPIs. We're being quite vague in certain areas where we're actually saying, you know, certain bits of data is not reported, or we're sort of deliberately sometimes using commas on our data sets and sometimes not, just to show that actually these days that really doesn't make much of a difference. Yeah, so if we show that particular example, what we can see here is that essentially we've got a series of KPIs that we've got information about, and we can see in this particular case, I've actually asked it to calculate net new recurring revenue. I don't need to have AI do that. That's something that's just showing off more than anything else. But ultimately, you can see here that it's actually able to interpret the data. It is correctly understanding what we mean by delinquent churn. So delinquent churn is effectively where people have not renewed, not because they've explicitly cancelled, but where they've failed to perform an action, and it's suggesting in that particular instance that I might look at alternative payment methods and things like that. So when we see sort of a user experience within a platform where we see a series of dashboards or a series of data points, and then we have an assistant on the right hand side that allows us to engage with those data points behind the scenes, this is effectively what's going on. It's all forming part of the sort of the prompt engineering. Where it gets interesting is if we were to think about this from a practical standpoint. Let's say I had an events dashboard and I had some information around my event activity, and then I said, how might I gain further revenue from my events? It may say, go and run a load more webinars. But actually, what can be quite interesting is almost having some storytelling about your organization and its objectives, where you could almost sort of, once upon a time, there was an organization, so on and so forth, where you might actually say, give it the context that you don't charge for your webinars. So actually, the baseline context that you make available to the system as a whole to describe the organization and organization objectives means that individual tooling that you have then can be more sensible in its answers.
And just kind of thinking of putting together, sorry, I think it was, and around
sorry, Josh, I was just going to say that the video completed a bit too quickly. If we wanted to, I could bring up those kind of results piece, but I think we've moved on from that, so no worries.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So I suppose thinking, there's a lot of people here who are not technical people, myself included, joining us today. Thinking about that prompt and putting that prompt together, how technical do you have to be able to do this?
Well, I mean, there's various I mean, obviously the different vendors call them different things. So if you say Claude, for example, which I'm a big fan of, calls them projects, ChatGPT calls them GPTs, I guess, unsurprisingly, where the user experience is such that I have an ability to upload some documentation, I have some ability to kind of give it some information that it can use. So the example I showed was quite techie, where I was actually showing what was going on in a kind of raw data sense. But obviously the UI treatments on the various tooling from Anthropic or from ChatGPT ultimately is allowing us to kind of create a body of knowledge that then through RAG is being searched and then kind of made available. I mean, even when you see ChatGPT say it's going off to search the internet, I mean, it's all doing the same stuff. They all work the same way largely, which is getting some extra context, then refeeding it back into the prompt. I would say that one of the most sensible things that somebody could do is look for some courses around basic prompt engineering. It's a really useful skill. I mean, they say like knowing how to formulate questions, or back when I was at uni, knowing how to go to the library to research as a skill has kind of just gone, right? So actually knowing how to ask questions, how to phrase questions, telling as if you were talking to a small child, telling it how to approach the problem, even saying things like think step by step can make a big difference to the examples, or give me the insights of how you've approached this problem, sometimes can be more interesting than the actual answer it comes up with, because then you can intercept it at the point it starts doing stupid stuff and course correct it.
No, absolutely. I just wonder, because you have mentioned it a few times around RAG and obviously that being important, but do you want to kind of do a layman's version of what that is and why it's important? Again, remembering we've a mix of people with us this morning.
So I mean, right now, a lot of there is a kind of a correlation between enterprise search and knowledge management. So essentially, when I ask a question, it will do a lingual search where it will then augment the results from that and put it into the prompt. And so if you take the example that I was talking about with regard to a knowledge library system, what it's doing is it's going and grabbing data. So it's going and searching data, bringing those data results back. There are kind of some exciting developments though that are kind of shifting some of this on its head. So in November, Anthropic open sourced something called MCP, which is called Model Context Protocol. And what that's about is, rather than me having to presuppose the data that I want to make available to the AI, either through the natural things that Copilot has access to because it's Microsoft, or the equivalents in Salesforce, or when I might be building a GPT to help me solve a problem. MCP is effectively a tooling that allows the AI to connect out to data sets. Now, this has got some real privacy concerns in terms of, am I going to open up my database to the AI and allow it to search or allow it to do certain things? But rather than having to presuppose what information the AI might need or want up front, what it allows us to do is to move in sort of a more agentic direction where on the basis of the problem that's been asked, the AI thinks about what tooling it might want, knowing what tools it has available to it. And a good example of that would be if I was looking at events that have run really well, I could provide it data about my events, but maybe it would decide to see what the weather is predicted to be like in the cities that I've suggested at the time that I've given, and maybe it would make the choice to do that. I think for membership organizations, if you really want to go out there, where it could be really interesting is starting to offer up some of organizational data through open connectors, such that people could actually publish and monetize some of their own kind of data sources, such that people could use that to research in the answers. So yeah, that's kind of the difference.
Perfect. So Alan has sorted out where our demo jumped off too quickly. So Alan, do you want to just go quickly? Thank you. So really this is just showing the results because, Alex put the effort into doing this. So Alex, do you just want to kind of give us a summary of around that, the results of the prompt?
Yeah,
and anything else to kind of cover on that?
Obviously, the net new MRR calculation that it's doing there and its comparison against the 2 years, I mean, that's obviously pretty straightforward. The fact that it's noticed delinquent churn and it's making some recommendations there, I think is useful. I mean, what you can see really here, a lot of the time, the AI is only telling you answers to questions that you could probably determine if you just spent the time to analyze all of the individual data sets. But where it gets quite interesting is if you start to take people in your organization that are really great at interacting and asking really good questions, and start to create sort of libraries of prompts or libraries of questions that can be sort of played back. And actually with ChatGPT, we saw recently the introduction of scheduled tasks such that you could have it periodically in an agentic way going and asking questions and then coming back to you when there was interesting stuff that you might be interested in, which is obviously different to the kind of user experience that we see now of me actually going and asking the question live as well. Perfect.
So I'm conscious of time because we've got loads of questions coming in. So I'm going to move on, Alan, if you can, to the poll. We just want to run one other quick poll. So bear with me while I actually bring this up. So what we're asking in this poll is which areas of AI applications is most relevant to your organization? So again, I'll just let that run for a couple of seconds. The winner so far, 100%, is improving data analysis and decision making, which it probably isn't a surprise. So letting that run for another second. And okay, I'm popular poll. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and let me share those results. So the winner, quite close in a lot of these, the winner on this is streamlining administrative tasks and operations, followed by improving data analytics and decision making. And then, really not a surprise looking at things like member engagement, thinking around service delivery. So there's a bit of a widespread. Alan, any thoughts that you have on that?
Yeah, I think it's nice to see that it's kind of a bit more diverse. I think I probably would have thought that kind of, just streamlining administrative tasks would be it. But I think enhancing those engagement pieces, I think that's quite nice to see that people are starting to think about that. The one that surprises me most probably, I guess, is the improving data analysis and decision making, because I think that's showing that we're starting to see real use cases. The obvious ones at the moment in each generation, yeah, those are great, but actually using AI to help us make decisions and make better decisions, I think that's kind of the probably the biggest growth area that we'll probably start to see as people start to realize that actually this can help them make those decisions based on the data, which we've been trying to do for years. And sometimes the data can be hard to interpret. I think AI can certainly help with that.
Perfect. So I'm going to hand back to you, Alan, because I want to make sure we get to Q&A to bring Alex back in for lots more questions. So I'm going to stop sharing those results and back to you, Alan.
Thanks, Joyce. So I think before we did move on to that, I thought it was really useful just to kind of try and do our typical 6 tips for ensuring success. So um, first one I think here is to definitely start small, and that is to have clear objectives for time and what you want to achieve. Time box things. Don't let things get too big. The broader your ambitions, the broader the project will be, the costs, etc., the timeline. So if you are able to find small, relatively quick win scenarios, I think those are great places to start. Do give thought when you're identifying these kind of, start small areas where they can scale, because you will invest time and energy in things. And if it is just a small one case scenario, you might find that it struggle to then scale that. So think about something that can scale, but definitely keep it small to get started. Then looking at kind of data readiness, make sure that you assess your data for quality and for depth. Depth sometimes gets lost here. If it's going to draw real conclusions, or if it's going to be useful for service delivery type question scenarios, it needs to have depth of data. So if we use those scenarios where you're asking for contextual search, it needs to have the full context. So back to Alex's point, I think in terms of data cleanliness is important, but data access is equally important. So making sure that it's got a lot of the answers. Some of the demonstrations that I've seen, Alex has been working on, which are great examples, is the ability to scan lots of documents, and generate data points and insights from those documents. I think people are thinking too much about content in terms of written content. It's written content on a website. AI is really smart. It can look at, unstructured data in a way that would take us a long time to summarize, and it can just do it. I've given ChatGPT screenshots of a project plan and said, help me figure out what the dates are, because the dates weren't very clear, and it was able to figure it out. So I think you can give it more complicated tasks as long as you've got the data to give it. Stop if you're not sure about where your data is. I don't think you should abandon the project, but I think if you do have concerns around your data readiness, do think about how you can move forward from there, and ensure that you are following your data policies to ensure that you are compliant. Again, another point that Alex made around personally identifiable information. Please identify that and make sure that is not exposed to your models. There are some great examples of early AI execution where that was done, and that can be quite embarrassing and cause you regulatory compliance issues. Looking at identifying risks, this is kind of always going to be there. Assess what you're doing for ethical and operational related risks. Some risks are generic. They will apply to anyone implementing AI, but some will be specific to your organization, almost certainly because of the data that you hold and how you're exposing that. So please give thought to that. And then something that I think does get kind of lost when we're dealing with any initiative these days, this is technology, and technology needs to be thought about in the context of how human beings will interact with it and use it. So do think about investing in change, and that can be simple things like training staff on practical use and implications. Ensure that the policies are part of that in terms of training people. You will need to address people's fears, back to that point that we've seen about concerns that people will have about, is AI going to replace their jobs? You can and should address those as part of that change process and set expectations. And then you'll note there that communicate kind of slips off the screen. That's not a typo, that's actually intentional, because it just is something you're always going to have to do. Communication around this topic is key, going back to addressing those fears. If people know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that you have ethical considerations at its core, then you can manage those expectations better, but it only happens through communication. Learn and adapt as you go. I think this is a highly fluid scenario. I think that things will evolve and change really rapidly. We've seen probably the fastest rate of change of any technology type around AI, and I think that will continue. I think it will slow down. The rate of change will probably slow down as we start to look at real world execution scenarios. So the hype is now kind of behind us. I think we are starting to see real things, but plan for that fluidity. Ensure that you can keep looking at things. So set your milestones, set expectations, and review them to make sure that if the plan isn't working, don't abandon it. Certainly don't stick, with the original plan if it isn't working, but adapt and work with your partners to be able to do that. And the right partners will understand how this is kind of a fluid scenario, and they need to work with you on that. And then because we do insist in encourage sort of a continuous improvement around this, is review and revise. You are going to have to evaluate the performance, because in some places you won't achieve what you wanted to because it's so new, but in other places you'll achieve new things. You'll recognize new opportunities by taking those first steps, and you will probably need to adapt as you go forward from there. So I think those were my top 6 tips. Alex, before we hand over to Q&A, I just thought, did you have any thoughts you agree or disagree? I'm open to all types.
I think the learn and adapt, but also, I mean, I've said it before. I think if you looked at how a lot of organizations responded during COVID in terms of necessity driving things, you know, the sort of the agility that we saw in some organizations that previously would have been unheard of, you know, in terms of, you know, embracing things like Zoom or remote meetings, you know, digitizing things rather than the filing cabinet. So I think for me, it is just saying how quickly this stuff moves. So, you know, coming up with large, predictable projects, traditional waterfall approach, in my opinion, is not the way to approach this stuff. It has to be, you know, small, agile, iterative, you know, experimentation. You know, I would avoid massive lock-in in terms of multi-year deals around vendor agreements, myself included, frankly, because you know, this stuff moves at such pace that actually, you know, one of the questions was, you know, what questions should we be asking vendors? Well, actually, asking vendors how you're going to deal with the unknown of the fact that you're, you know, how are you putting together a framework to plug in AI tooling, knowing that some of the tooling you're using right now will not be tooling you're using in 6 months or 12 months time. So it is that kind of that change process and that agility, and having contracts that kind of support that in terms of your ability to change your mind and swap things in and swap things out as well, I would say.
Yeah. Good tip there. Joyce, back to you for Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have lots of questions. Just to say, we won't be able to cover them all, but we will, and Alex has been writing in some answers to some of them already, but we will answer all the questions and share those afterwards. So great question. Should companies create their own AI strategy and project management framework to effectively assess AI's potential and areas of interest within their operations, or are there existing models and frameworks they can follow? Alex.
I think from a change, this is about change, and it's about uncertainty, and so I think it's you know, it's about putting together frameworks that allow us to deal with uncertain outcomes. You know, if we're outcome led in rather than technology led, you know, one of the questions that was missing earlier about all of the activities, you know, are you spending lots of money on X? It's the same with apps to a degree. You know, back in the day, everyone would be super excited about having an app, mostly because they believe they should, rather than they had a good use case in some cases. So I think, what does good look like? How do we assess whether what we're doing is valuable? And just iteration and kind of continuous improvement, I think is the main thing for me.
Alan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that.
I think I kind of agree. I think to purely answer Puck's question, I think absolutely you should create your own strategy. I think that has to be there. I wouldn't necessarily just take something off the shelf from a strategy perspective. From a project management perspective, I think implementations were probably a bit more agile in nature because of the fluidity and the change that we've spoken about. But I think start with the strategy and then kind of take the steps, and you should be able to follow it there. Yeah, I think you know, everything Alex said is in addition to what I just said. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and I think then in bringing in another question, because you've both touched on change and answering that question, and I think it is completely relevant. But another question that come in is, any advice on organizational change? How do we bring staff with us in this? How do we upskill staff, grow awareness in such a fast-moving environment? So thinking about that skill, from a change in skill, is there an approach that you would recommend around that, Alex?
I think I was just literally typing an answer to another question where I was almost going to put the same answer. So this is that avoids me typing. But I think being product led is a really good way of approaching this. So thinking, and we're seeing this with membership organizations in general, moving away from this idea of having a series of projects that we go through where we hire a project manager for this point in time for this project that we're executing, and instead starting to talk about product managers, of saying, what is the product that we're creating. So I think actually using something like if you Google product canvas, there's some really nice ways of sort of approaching things from a sort of target standpoint, what the goals are, what the metrics are that we're going to sort of use to assess success, and then just iterating, really.
Yeah, perfect. So I want to get another question in. Does there tend to be specific buzzwords that will be more accurate prompts, or is this dependent on the specific knowledge that is used? Alex.
So one of the problems that you have with all of the approaches at the moment, and they are trying to, as I mentioned earlier, you've got MCP, which is effectively the ability to live call out to data sources. But at the moment, this sort of context window, or the sort of the really just think about that, the size of the question that we're asking. As quantities of data increase, the accuracy of things like RAG goes down, because ultimately, more in, it's got to sift. So there are some opportunities to start to think about refining your knowledge manually, to start to identify insight within your knowledge, such that you can sort of slim things down from that perspective. That can be can be quite helpful. But yeah, I mean, everything runs on the same premise at the moment. I mean, the problem that we have is that by making the sort of questions bigger, you're burning more compute, which is, which we haven't talked about the environmental impact of all of this, which is, for me, is a big consideration. Being efficient is a big thing. But you can write prompts, and some of the prompt language we use will be, given the context that I'm providing, keep the answers grounded in the context that I've provided. If you do not know the answer to the question, say so. So you can explicitly instruct it to not make things up, as well.
Perfect. Alan?
Yeah, I think my own execution on this is interesting, actually, is that I found that the way you phrase the question and the importance that you place on the question can change the answers dramatically. So I'd encourage you to try this, actually, for people who play around with ChatGPT. Ask it a question to produce, a result or something, and then ask the same question again and say, my life depends on this. My boss will fire me if I get this wrong. And note how it adapts, because it starts to focus on severity. The tone changes, and it tries to make it more important. The other thing to be really cognizant of is that if you ask ChatGPT for research results, as we sort of prepare these webinars, we go, oh, help me find some research that helps, answer this question. ChatGPT, Anthropic, Gemini will all answer the question. But if you ask them to provide citations, they are now starting to say, I've synthesized that answer. And that's a combination of results from different things. Be careful that AI, if you don't dig in and you don't give it too much, you need to give it structure to ensure that you're getting the answer. The final thing here is in terms of buzzwords, is remember it's conversational. So if you get a response back from ChatGPT or any other tool and you don't think it's hit the mark, tell it. Say, I don't quite agree with that point. I'm not sure that's what I was expecting. I think that's wrong. And you don't have to be polite about that. You probably could be polite about it, because it probably changes the shape of the answer, but feed back to it and treat it as a conversation, and you will get better responses from it. Don't take the first output and just move on. I think there are better outputs to be had from it.
Perfect.
So break the question down. So natural language flow doesn't always work. So sometimes it's better to actually, in the style of question, it can be slightly robotic in the way that you start asking the question. But if you start to break down how you want it to approach the problem, don't assume it's obvious that it would go and do certain things. Break it down into a series of steps that you want it to do. That makes a big difference as well.
So as always, we've run out of time, so I'm going to hand back to Alan.
Yeah, I always, on this topic, love a good quote from Mustafa Suleyman, who's the author of the book The Coming Wave. Definitely give it a read. I think this is absolutely going to be the most productive decade in our species, and it's going to be there because we're going to leverage the tools like AI to help us achieve that. So I wanted to thank our guest Alex today for joining us and giving us some great insight. Alex is certainly at the forefront of AI, so he's definitely a person that you can ask great questions of. We will be answering all of the questions that we didn't cover. We will circulate those probably in another email tomorrow. The recording will go out by about 12 o'clock as soon as we get the recording back from Zoom. And I did want to ask if people could please participate in our AI survey. We definitely need some better UK NFP representation and understanding of AI in the sector. So please do participate in the survey. We will be doing a dedicated session on sharing all of that, and we'll share the results with all respondents. So once again, thank you all for joining us today on our first webinar for 2025. And I wish you all a very good week. Thank you.
Thank you.